Tonight on the Midnight Drive, we're taking one final drive through Nevada. Past the neon cities and empty highways, past ghost towns, clown motels, abandoned mines, military fences, old cemeteries, and stretches of desert so quiet they almost feel unreal. But tonight, we're asking a bigger question. What actually makes a place feel haunted? Because maybe the stories were never just about ghosts. Maybe they were about silence, isolation, history, uncertainty, and the human need to place meaning into spaces that feel emotionally unresolved. This week, Nevada showed us something fascinating. Some landscapes don't just hold stories. They change the way that people think, feel, imagine, and remember. And once that happens, mythology becomes inevitable. So what makes places feel haunted? Not necessarily haunted in the supernatural sense, but emotionally haunted. The kind of place people describe as unsettling, heavy, strange, emotionally wrong, or emotionally charged. Even before any ghost story enters the conversation. Because this week in Nevada, we kept running into the same realization again and again and again. The environment always came first. Before the mythology, before the conspiracy theories, before the hauntings. Nevada itself already felt emotionally unusual. It's a weird place. And maybe that's the real beginning of almost every legend that humans create. Not proof, not evidence, atmosphere. It's all in the atmosphere. The human brain responds powerfully to environments. Far more powerfully than most people realize. Light changes emotion. Silence changes perception. Isolation changes interpretation. And uncertainty changes imagination. Nevada contains enormous amounts of all four. And that's why the state feels psychologically different than many other places in America. Because Nevada constantly swings between emotional extremes. Endless desert silence. And the brightest city on earth. Ghost towns. And massive tourist spectacles. Ancient mountains. And neon artificiality. Restricted military zones. And roadside alien diners. Nothing about Nevada feels emotionally balanced. And the human brain notices imbalance immediately. Pay attention to that. Because people are constantly trying to emotionally organize the spaces around them. Think about it. We instinctively ask, what kind of place is this? Is it safe? Is it active? Is it abandoned? Does this environment make sense? Usually, the answer to that question is pretty clear. A neighborhood feels lived in. A forest feels natural. A shopping mall feels commercial. But there's something about Nevada that constantly disrupts emotional categorization. Las Vegas feels artificial against the surrounding desert. The Clown Motel feels emotionally contradictory. Virginia City feels suspended in time. And of course, we've got Area 51. Area 51 feels secretive even before anybody explains why. And once places become difficult to emotionally categorize, the imagination becomes more active automatically. That's where mythology begins. It's not from stupidity. It's not from gullibility. It's from the brain attempting to resolve emotional uncertainty. People hate unresolved environments. We want narrative. We want explanation. We want meaning, especially in places where ordinary emotional logic stops functioning entirely. That's why isolated landscapes generate folklore so consistently across human history. Deserts, mountains, forests, open ocean. Any environment large enough to make humans feel small. Eventually, we make them mythological because scale changes psychology. And Nevada's scale is enormous. There are stretches of road where towns disappear for hours. Hours! There are places where darkness fully swallows the horizon at nighttime. There are places where silence becomes so complete that even distant sounds start feeling emotionally amplified. In environments like that, ordinary things begin feeling extraordinary. A single light in the distance holds more significance than it does during the day. A strange sound feels more significant than it does during the day. A building becomes emotionally memorable just because it's there. On a backdrop of open desert, a singular building, we start asking ourselves, why is it there? That's why Nevada naturally creates stories. It's not because the state is objectively more paranormal than anywhere else, but because the environment intensifies our interpretation of it. And once stories attach themselves to places, they reshape the environment emotionally. That's another thing that we kept seeing this week. Narrative changes perception. The moment that someone says, people have seen figures here, the building changes emotionally. The moment somebody says, something secret is hidden beyond those mountains, the desert changes emotionally. The moment that somebody says, people hear footsteps in that old saloon, the silence changes emotionally. Stories become part of the architecture itself. That's why Nevada's myths feel so deeply tied to atmosphere. The desert already feels unresolved. The stories simply organize the feeling. And maybe that's why so many different types of mythology coexist there simultaneously. Think about it. This week, we covered ghost stories, UFO stories, mining legends, roadside folklore, nuclear paranoia, conspiracy theories, and liminal spaces. Nevada supports all of them emotionally because the state itself already feels suspended between realities. Not literally, of course, but emotionally. The environment constantly shifts between natural and artificial, populated and empty, historic and temporary, visible and hidden. That instability creates psychological openness. And psychological open environments become projection surfaces. Humans start placing fears, hopes, anxieties, curiosities, and imagination directly into the landscape itself. That's why people leave Nevada with stories. Even when nothing explicitly paranormal happened, people remember how quiet it felt, how strange the highways felt at night, how emotionally disconnected some places seemed, how the desert darkness looked endless, how old towns felt paused in time. The emotional memory lingers. When was the last time you were out to Nevada? When was the last time you were out to Vegas? Please let us know in the comments below wherever you might be listening tonight. We'd love to hear about it. And as always, we love having you along for the ride right here on the Midnight Drive. One of the strangest things that people do is how quickly we attach emotion to places. Not just memories, but places themselves. A building, a road, a hotel room, a stretch of desert at nighttime. Certain environments begin carrying emotional associations so strongly that eventually the place itself feels changed. And maybe that's what people are actually sensing when they describe locations as haunted. Not necessarily supernatural presence, but accumulated emotional meaning. Nevada is filled with places like that, places where history never fully disappeared. Think Virginia City might be the clearest example. Let's break it down. A mining boomtown that once exploded with life. 25,000 people living high in the mountains during the height of the Comstock lode. Money moving constantly. Saloons crowded nightly. Opera houses filled with performances. Miners descending underground every day, knowing collapse, fire, or toxic gas could kill them without any warning. And then, eventually, the boom faded. But the town remained. All right, this is where we get into the psychology of it. The environments became emotionally strange when they outlived the era that they were built for. Virginia City still visibly carries that 19th century vibe inside of it. It's got wooden sidewalks. It's got Victorian architecture. It's got old cemeteries climbing up the hillsides. It's got historic saloons that still glow after dark. The physical evidence of another time remains everywhere. And once places visibly preserve history that intensely, people begin feeling like the past itself is still nearby. That feeling becomes even stronger when tragedy is attached to the landscape. Mining towns carried death constantly. The Yellow Jacket mine disaster alone killed dozens of workers trapped underground during a fire in 1869. Events like that permanently alter collective memory. Buildings absorb association. And eventually, the environment itself starts feeling emotionally charged before anyone even tells the story out loud. That's why ghost stories thrive so naturally in preserved historic towns. Not necessarily because ghosts objectively exist there, but because people emotionally sense continuity between past and present. The past remains visible. And visibility creates emotional presence. The Washoe Club is a perfect example. One of Virginia City's oldest saloons. Dark wood interiors. Historic photographs. Old chandeliers hanging above rooms filled with stories. People describe footsteps, shadow figures, cigar smoke, and voices in empty spaces. And maybe those experiences are paranormal. But maybe they're not. Either way, the building already feels emotionally heavy before the stories begin. Once environments create emotional tension, our imaginations become active automatically. The same thing happens in old theaters. Piper's Opera House still carries stories of movement backstage after closing hours. Figures seen briefly in the balconies. Footsteps echoing through empty aisles. And honestly, theater ghost stories feel believable emotionally because theaters already preserve emotional residue naturally. Think about it. Performance spaces in general absorb intensity. applause, crowds, music, and then, at the end of it all, silence. The emotional contrast lingers in the architecture itself, even if no paranormal activity exists at all. That's part of what makes certain places feel liminal, too. Not abandoned, not fully active, just emotionally suspended. The Clown Motel worked the same way. Let's recap. A roadside motel beside a cemetery in the middle of the Nevada desert. Does it get more liminal than that? Bright clown faces. Vacancy signs glowing in silence. Temporary lodging beside permanent burial. Every emotional signal conflicted with every other one. And that contradiction creates amazing amounts of unease. It's not even necessarily fear. It's almost a small, nagging feeling on the inside, telling us that something just feels off, something feels wrong. It's a sensation that the environment itself didn't emotionally resolve properly. And that's the thing about liminal environments. They often feel unsettling because they appear disconnected from their original emotional purpose. A motel built for comfort becomes eerie in silence. A clown designed to communicate joy becomes disturbing without any context. An old mining town preserved too carefully starts feeling paused in time. Humans react strongly to emotional mismatch. And Nevada contains enormous amounts of emotional mismatch. Artificial cities inside empty desert. Tourism beside ghost towns. Atomic testing near casinos. Alien mythology beside military secrecy. The entire state feels layered with conflicting emotional realities. And maybe that's why people leave Nevada feeling like they experienced something difficult to explain. Because many places there don't feel emotionally stable. Again, not necessarily dangerous, just unresolved. And unresolved environments naturally pull people toward storytelling. That's one reason ghost tourism works so well psychologically. The stories provide emotional organization. They transform vague unease into a narrative. A strange feeling in an old saloon becomes, people say, someone still walks here. A heavy atmosphere in the theater becomes, the performers never really left. The stories don't necessarily create the feeling. Often, they simply give language to the feeling that exists when you arrive in those spaces. And maybe that's the deeper truth beneath many haunted places. Not that the dead literally remain behind, but that humans leave emotional fingerprints everywhere they go. Grief, celebration, violence, loneliness, ambition, hope, fear. Places associated with intense human experience eventually begin carrying emotional identity. Nevada is filled with environments where intense human experience remains physically visible. Old cemeteries, mining tunnels, desert highways, saloons, ghost towns. The emotional evidence never fully disappeared. And maybe that's why Nevada's stories feel so compelling. Because beneath all the paranormal folklore, the state reveals something profoundly human. We don't just build towns and roads and buildings. We leave pieces of ourselves inside them. You're listening to the Midnight Drive. Now, if haunted places are often built from emotional residue, then let's talk about conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories are often built from unresolved uncertainty. And Nevada became one of America's greatest landscapes for unresolved uncertainty. Because for decades, huge portions of the state existed behind fences. I'm sure you can imagine it. Restricted, classified, partially hidden. And whenever people sense hidden information, our imaginations immediately start expanding into the empty space around it. And that's exactly what happened with Area 51. Important thing to consider is this, though. People were not imagining the secrecy. The secrecy was very real. Experimental aircraft really were being tested in the Nevada desert. Military zones really did stretch across enormous sections of land. Nuclear detonations really did shake the ground beneath Las Vegas. The government really did refuse to explain much of what people were witnessing. That combination changed the emotional atmosphere of the entire state. Because once people know something is being hidden from them, ordinary uncertainty starts feeling loaded with significance. Think about it. A strange light in the sky no longer feels random. A distant aircraft, and the sound of it feels suspicious. A warning sign in the desert feels emotionally amplified. Nevada already provided the perfect physical environment for that amplification. Silence, isolation, distance. Huge empty stretches where ordinary reference points disappear entirely. Our brains struggle in environments like that. It's not because we're weak, but because uncertainty naturally increases pattern recognition. When information becomes incomplete, the mind starts searching harder for meaning. That's a survival mechanism. We've evolved to detect patterns quickly. Movement in darkness, unusual sounds, unfamiliar shapes, changes in environment. The problem is, once uncertainty becomes emotionally intense enough, the brain sometimes begins overinterpreting patterns as well. That's where mythology starts forming. And Nevada continuously created emotional conditions where overinterpretation became more likely, especially during the Cold War, because Cold War America already operated under enormous psychological tension, fear of nuclear war, government secrecy, espionage, invisible threats, military experimentation. Then place all of that anxiety inside the Nevada desert, and the mythology almost creates itself. Area 51 became more than a military installation. It became a symbol of hidden knowledge, of withheld truth, the possibility that ordinary people were not being told everything about reality itself. And emotionally, that idea is irresistible to many people because uncertainty is uncomfortable. But mystery is compelling. People often transform uncertainty into mythology because mythology feels emotionally satisfying. It checks a box that we don't realize we're looking to be checked. A hidden alien base feels more emotionally complete than classified aircraft testing. Conspiracy provides narrative closure. And the human brain craves closure. What a weird sentence. The human brain craves closure. That's why UFO mythology became so deeply attached to Nevada specifically. The environment emotionally supported the story. Long desert highways, restricted mountains, warning signs authorizing deadly force, silent aircraft moving overhead at night, tiny roadside towns built around alien tourism. Even the extraterrestrial highway itself feels like mythology made physical. A road where the surrounding emptiness becomes part of the story. Honestly, Nevada's nuclear testing history deepened this atmosphere even further. More than 900 nuclear detonations occurred there between 1951 and 1992. Literal mushroom clouds rose over the desert. Entire communities became downwinders, exposed to radioactive fallout. Las Vegas casinos hosted atomic viewing parties where tourists watched explosions in the distance like fireworks. How surreal does that sound now? It really happened, though. That blending of spectacle and existential danger permanently altered the emotional identity of the state of Nevada, because the state became associated with invisible forces. Radiation, classified technology, restricted zones. Things people knew existed but couldn't fully see, let alone understand. That emotional atmosphere naturally breeds conspiracy. Conspiracy itself often functions similarly to ghost stories. Both emerge when humans attempt organizing uncertainty into emotionally coherent narrative. Ghost stories explain emotional heaviness. Conspiracy theories explain informational heaviness. Both provide structure to unresolved experience. Keep in mind, that does not necessarily immediately make them true. Okay? But it does make them emotionally understandable. And maybe that's why Nevada became such a powerful myth-making landscape overall. Because the state continuously confronted people with uncertainty they couldn't easily resolve. Empty highways, ghost towns, secret military installations, old mining disasters, nuclear testing, artificial cities glowing in enormous darkness. Nevada constantly places people inside environments where ordinary emotional certainty begins breaking down slightly. And once certainty weakens, storytelling rushes in. That's the deeper connection, tying together nearly everything we explored this week. The Clown Motel, Virginia City, Area 51, ghost towns, the extraterrestrial highway, all of them involve environments that resist simple emotional explanation. Places where people feel disconnected, uncertain, emotionally exposed, suspended between realities. And once environments begin producing those feelings consistently, people naturally begin mythologizing them. Not because people are irrational, because storytelling is one of humanity's oldest tools for emotionally organizing uncertainty. We create legends to stabilize environments that feel unstable. We create folklore to explain atmospheres that feel difficult to articulate. You're listening to the Midnight Drive. So paranormal or not paranormal? Maybe we can find a real reason why places become haunted. And maybe it's not because something supernatural permanently attached itself to the land, but because people leave emotional fingerprints everywhere we go. And some environments preserve those fingerprints more visibly than others do. Nevada preserves them everywhere. In abandoned mining towns, in empty desert highways, in roadside motels glowing quietly after midnight, in the old saloons still carrying stories from generations ago, in the restricted military land hidden behind warning signs, in the overwhelming silence surrounding all of it. Over the course of this entire week, we kept returning to the same emotional pattern. Places that felt unresolved. Again, not necessarily dangerous, not necessarily paranormal, just emotionally unfinished in some way, shape, or form. The Clown Motel felt unsettling because every emotional signal surrounding it conflicted with every other one. A motel designed for temporary comfort, beside a cemetery, filled with smiling clown faces, surrounded by desert silence. Virginia City felt emotionally heavy because the past never fully disappeared from that environment. The old architecture remained. The mining history remained. The cemeteries remained. The stories remained. Area 51 became mythological because secrecy left enormous narrative gaps inside an already psychologically strange landscape. The desert itself amplified uncertainty. And once uncertainty becomes emotionally amplified, we instinctively begin filling it with story. That may be one of the oldest human behaviors that there is, because storytelling helps people emotionally survive uncertainty. Ghost stories organize grief. Conspiracy theories organize hidden information. Urban legends organize fear. Folklore organizes the unknown. And maybe mythology itself is simply what happens when human emotion encounters environments too large, too quiet, or too unresolved to fully explain. Nevada contains countless environments like that. Places where the scale of the landscape makes people feel very small. Places where darkness removes familiar reference points. Places where silence becomes emotionally noticeable. Places where old history remains physically visible instead of fading away. The human brain reacts strongly to environments that resist emotional categorization. And that's why Nevada lingers in people's memories so intensely, even for the people who never experienced anything overtly paranormal there. They remember the highways, the emptiness, the strange silence, the glowing neon, the abandoned buildings, the overwhelming night sky, the feeling that something about the environment itself felt emotionally different. And that feeling might be more powerful than traditional horror. Because at least traditional horror usually depends on immediate fear. But psychological unease, especially when people can't fully explain where it came from, that lingers. That's what liminal spaces reveal so effectively as well. The discomfort rarely comes from any kind of direct threat. It comes from emotional mismatch. A place designed for activity becoming quiet. A cheerful image detached from its original context. And an environment that no longer feels emotionally aligned with its intended purpose. Nevada is filled with those mismatches. Las Vegas itself is probably the biggest one. The brightest city on earth, surrounded by enormous darkness. Artificial luxury inside unforgiving desert. Massive tourist spectacle surrounded by ghost towns and abandoned roads. The state almost feels emotionally split between realities. And maybe that's why it became such fertile ground for mythology. Because mythology grows best in places where emotional certainty becomes unstable, where the environment itself feels difficult to resolve internally. That's why people mythologize deserts, mountains, forests, old buildings, abandoned towns. The environments create emotional conditions where imagination becomes more active. And once the imagination starts running wild, stories begin attaching themselves to the landscape naturally. It's not because people are irrational. It's because we're emotional pattern-seeking creatures trying to orient ourselves inside uncertainty. That's what this whole week in Nevada ultimately revealed. The stories were never really just about ghosts or aliens or haunted motels or secret military bases. The stories were about people. People trying to emotionally interpret environments that felt larger, stranger, quieter, or heavier than ordinary life. Maybe that's why these legends survive generation after generation. Because even as technology changes, human psychology doesn't change nearly as much as people assume. Modern people still struggle with silence. We still struggle with uncertainty. We still search for meaning in unresolved places. We still project emotion onto landscapes. We still create stories to stabilize environments that feel emotionally unstable. Nevada simply makes those instincts easier to see because the state strips away distraction. The desert leaves room. Room for silence, room for memory, room for anxiety, room for imagination. And once people are left alone with enough silence and uncertainty, they begin creating mythology almost automatically. Maybe that's why Nevada feels so unforgettable. Not because it proves anything supernatural exists, but because it reveals something about ourselves. That we don't just experience places physically, we experience them emotionally. And some landscapes affect emotion so powerfully that the stories created around them begin feeling inseparable from the land itself.